I've got a little clip from the castle. If you tap on that, did it come across or not? Oh, it didn't come across. That's all right. But you know the phrase, tell him he's dreaming. You know, as he's looking through the trading post again and again, hey, Dad, there's jousting sticks. How much is he asking for them? 450. Oh, tell him he's dreaming. Then right at the end, he says to his dad, what's a pulpit? It's a thing a minister gives his message sermon from. How much is he asking for it? 800. He's dreaming. And so in that context, I've got to say, I love your theme. Dare to dream. If we can go to the next slide. That's the one. I love your theme. It's bold, it's full of faith, and brothers and sisters, hear this right, it has a healthy dose of insanity attached to it. Okay? Because when we commit our lives, our plans and our dreams to God, things can look pretty and unstuck. In the encounters where God and God alone leads us and takes us, and the purposes that he builds in us has a healthy dose of insanity around it. Dare to dream fills our lives with this endless God-fueled possibility and sacrifice. It will lead us to places we never expected to go. It will have us walk in places we never expected to walk. It will remove comforts we never wanted removed. And it'll move us deeper and deeper into this picture of a God who we serve that is so large that we realise everything is him. So the context I want to bring this out of, and some of you may know it, some of you may not, is out of 1 Kings 17, is where I'm wanting to anchor. 1 Kings 17, 18, 19 is really the context I'm wanting to anchor the theme that you're looking at, this dare to dream around. And the character that we're introduced to in 1 Kings 17 is a guy called Elijah. And he just sort of springs on the page, and we don't know much about him other than he's introduced to us as this guy called Elijah the Tishbite. And we see really quickly that his life is committed to living out God's purposes. And Elijah is a man who God has filled within him this dream for the redemption of a nation. Now, we don't see that happen. We don't know how it's happened. We just see how this plays out. And we see that within Elijah is this willingness to obey what God is asking him to do, but it's based not just in sort of being kind to a neighbour, but it's based in the redemption of a nation. Where God's desire, as is expressed through Elijah, is for the people who have been blindly captured in their idolatry to return to the worship of the one true living God. In this time, the leaders of that nation and the nations around are corrupt. People have been led in the wrong ways, and only a few know who God is. And we understand that this is a dream that's going to cost something. And so the first thing in 1 Kings 17, in the first couple of verses, the first thing we see coming out of the mouth of Elijah is this statement where he goes and he confronts the king, which is a pretty bold thing to do. You've got to have a big dream if you're going to go and rock up to the king in the midst of his palace and say to the king these words, "As the Lord of God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there'll be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." Pretty big statement. Not the dream that you would really want to be the dream holder of. But as a young man, I can't imagine Elijah grew up dreaming of wanting to become the most wanted man in Israel. Dreaming of being hunted by armies, of having a bounty on his head, and yet God puts him in front of King Ahab. He delivers this message, and he suddenly becomes the most wanted, hunted, despised man in Israel. This is where this dream has taken him. Yet here he is, at God's prompting, delivering a message of judgment that's going to cause incredible suffering, because God has a plan, a purpose and a dream to redeem his people from the slavery of idolatry. And Elijah, you're the dream holder. Can you see this good dose of insanity? When we dare to dream. So where is Elijah's satisfaction? He follows the voice of God, and now he heads not to a resort, but he heads to a ravine out of the wilderness. He doesn't go to enjoy roast lamb. He is now enjoying the droppings that are being delivered to him by ravens, is what the message says. He's got to hide. And what we see as we read through these next passages is that there's a complete absence of comfort. As he fulfills this dream, comfort is taken away. This is some dream. However, all of it is fitting God's purpose of redemption. And this is the first point that I want to make, that in our dreams, they must align with God's purpose of redemption. In Elijah's case, God's sovereign dream is the redemption of his people from slavery and poverty and idolatry to the freedom and abundance found in holy worship. When we were worshipping this morning, I was sitting over there. I wasn't standing, I was sitting. But I encountered God. God encountered me with a memory of something, and I almost went, "Oh, what do I do with this?" But it happens that when we're in worship, God encounters us. And God is wanting a people to come out of their idolatry, to come back into the worship of who he is as the true God, because he wants to do something with them. So when God lays something on our hearts, a dream of his desire, one of the tests that we can apply is whether this fits into God's redemption plan. Is redemption part of this picture? Because God's nature is to redeem. We heard it through Isabel. We heard it through Michael. We will hear it through the rest of our lives as part of church community. We should be expecting it. God's purpose is a redemptive purpose. It should sit central in who we are in our dreams. And so continuing in the story of Elijah, we read that after the brook dries up, God directs him to this widow in Zarephath in this region of Sidon. Now, part of what is really significant about this is hidden at first glance, but if we look into the context, King Ahab, who's the guy who's the king of Israel that Elijah's gone to, He's married to this woman called Jezebel. And she's a nasty piece of work. And she's from Sidon. And here is God sending Elijah to ground zero. This is where she's from. These are her people. Elijah would have known this. And here is God directing him to go live at ground zero. Woo. Deep in the heart of enemy territory. There's a good dose of insanity just there. Because our dream in Fiji is to see men and women in prison redeemed regardless of how they got there. For some, that pathway also means redemption from addiction. For others, it's anger. For others, it's violence. For others, it's greed and lust. Each day of the week, our recovery or restoration programs are happening across all of the 12 prisons. And now, in one prison in Vanuatu, and sometime this year, it'll begin in the Solomons. God has been very good with that. But God's redemption will always go to ground zero. God's not a player who sits out on the sidelines. He will direct our paths. And direct our paths to where ground zero is, just as he did with Elijah. Here's ground zero. Here's where this queen's from. We're going to take back her territory. We're going to bring a witness of who I am into the place that you will not believe. Does that make sense? Yeah. So one of the things that happened, and you heard me talk about this a bit last year, and I've got more to update, but we began in the ground zero in Suva, which is a community called Nanuku. And it's a squatter settlement. And it's ground zero for the crime that happens in Suva. It's where our prisoners come back out to. It's where they go to prison from. And so in 2000, we began a work there. And it's been a fascinating work, and I've just got a short video to play, which is the one. Yep.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine, and oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, and purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. And this is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. And this is my story, Lord, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day.
It was 4 years ago that we were invited into Nanuku, a community of 2,500 to 3,500 people squashed into a little area down beside the mangroves
and half of the community goes underwater every time there's a high tide. Nanuku is a red zone, full of drug trafficking, prostitution, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of violence, but a community where many of our prisoners go back to. So it's a community that has a history of incubating crime. We'd always wanted to take 1 foot out of the prison. Keep 1 foot in, but bring 1 foot out into the community to learn and to continue to take what we'd learnt in prison and bring it into the community. Nanuku was this opportunity. And over the 4 years, it has grown and developed to what you now see.
This is my song, praising my Savior all the day.
For a community that is 40 years old, it was just this last Christmas that Nanuku for the first time experienced a crime-free Christmas. This is God's story.
Praising my Savior all the day long.
The story gets better, because I did that video last year and we were able to celebrate that it had been a crime-free Christmas in 2023. We had another crime-free Christmas in 2024. So for 2 years running, 2 crime-free Christmases, which is amazing. That's redemptive, and to redemptive community in anyone's language. But the wonderful part is that I can't claim credit for it. I can celebrate it with you, and you can celebrate it with us, but I can't claim credit for it, because this is just the beautiful reality of God's desire to redeem. To redeem individuals and to redeem communities. And when it's God's dream birthed in us, God himself does the heavy lifting. Our part is to be present and to be faithful in our obedience. Because our dreams, and your theme of dare to dream, our dreams must align with God's redemptive purposes for cities, for communities, and for people. And seeing a dream bear fruit and knowing that our meagre effort has been infused and multiplied with God's strength and his is humbling. So my question to each of you in the room is this, is what redemptive dream has God placed in you? The second critical point around the dare to dream is faith. Not the illusion of faith, but a journey to establish a reality of living faith. If we go back to Elijah's story, it has got so many faith moments, it's hard to focus just on one. But there's one faith moment that often gets overlooked, and this occurs at the end of 3 years. Elijah's gone to King Ahab, said, it's not going to rain until I give the word. 3 years have passed, 3 years where he's been hunted, 3 years where he's had people out looking for him. And then God says, go present yourself back to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. Now, what God is asking here is no small thing. Okay, for 3 years he's had Elijah hiding out. So the hunted man is now being asked to go and reveal himself to the hunter. The king wants his life. Go present yourself to the king. The country's in ruins. People have had crop losses. Livestock is depleted. All because you spoke what God had wanted you to speak. And now, here is the same God saying, go back. Go back and present yourself to Ahab. Now, this takes faith. This takes faith off the bookshelf and opens it up as a reality in our lives. And so as this story unfolds, there's almost a test of faith in the midst of it, because again, Elijah meets this guy called Obadiah. As he's heading off to find Ahab and go and present himself, he meets Obadiah, and Obadiah is a senior official in the palace, but he's also a devout believer in God. And when he sees Ahab, he says, hey, what are you doing? Because Obadiah is so afraid to tell Ahab that he says to Elijah, what have I done wrong that you're handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? He knows the anger, he knows the potential risk, he knows what awaits. Obadiah knows the risk. And so Elijah says to Obadiah, it's all right, go find the king. Tell him I'm here. I'll wait here. Can you imagine what those hours would have been? Sitting, waiting for King Ahab to come. Now, I'm human. I'm pretty sure Elijah was human. He would have run a few scenarios in his head. Am I going to deliver this message and then have my head taken? What's next? Is there a future for me? Elijah promises to stay put. Obadiah goes to fetch the king, Ahab, and when Ahab sees Elijah, he says to him, is it really you, you troubler of Israel? And Elijah sort of doesn't fiddle around with any of that. He goes back hard and correct, and he turns the question around and into a truth, and he says, you are the troubler. You are the one who's created all this. This is what you now will do. Assemble your prophets, go to Mount Carmel, and we will meet again there. That takes faith. It requires standing in the breach and responding with truth, speaking what needs to be spoken and completing whatever that next immediate step of obedience is without fully knowing what lies behind it and if anything lies behind it. This week I went for a walk along between Merriweather Beach and Bar Beach. And the winds were up because the cyclone's just a bit north of us. And here's this guy. Got faith. The impact of the cyclone's evident. Here he is. You know, the waves are up, the wind's up. I did not expect to see this at all. And then to my surprise is this guy with a hang glider taking the opportunity that the storm is creating. That takes faith. When most people are sheltering, he's out in the midst of it. And so do our dreams of serving God allow for this development of our faith? These are walks of faith that will lead us into fire. We can feel the heat, we can calculate the risk, we experience that strange push to obedience. Obedience leaves us vulnerable. So vulnerable that we know that without God we will perish. These experiences move us into the depth of faith that reveals the reality of God. So my second question to you is, does the dream that God has birthed in you allow for the growth of a Spirit-infused faith? My third point, and this is a critical point, is whether our dreams can embrace the required abandonment. Now, we hear little about the word abandonment. In fact, it's probably got a bad rap. But as we read through Scripture, there's this strong picture and purpose, a godly purpose of abandonment are revealed. We see it in a number of places. We see God requiring us to leave something behind, but we see it first in Abraham being asked to leave his place and his people, to go to a place that I will show you. We see it, Isabel spoke of it, of Peter, James and John laying down their nets, their livelihood, to follow Jesus without any sense of what the salary might be. What are the benefits? We see Paul laying aside his privilege of being a trained Pharisee to embrace the humility of following Jesus. But we see it most profoundly in Jesus saying, turn the other cheek, abandoning the right of defending our rights to suffer all things for the glory of God. We see it in John the Baptist saying to his disciples, he must increase, I must decrease. So God-inspired dreams require a God-infused willingness of a death to self. Our ego has very little place in what God desires to achieve. It'll only get in the way as God seeks to fulfill his purposes and the dreams he places in the hearts of men and women, in the very hearts of men and women here today. So returning to our text, as Elijah follows in obedience to what seems an insanity, as he heads over to enemy territory, to a widow that God is going to reveal, Elijah discovers that the widow is blessed with a bit of flour and oil, and so he demands it. Bake me something. And amazingly, she doesn't run him out of town, but she agrees and shares what she has, and the widow receives this blessing of flour and oil that doesn't run out, and she shares that with Elijah as well as her hospitality. See, here in this story, God has revealed himself to the least of people, a widow and her orphan son. The story gets more dramatic as sometime later the son gets a fever and he dies. And Elijah cries out questioning it, saying, why? What is this? Lord, and he prays, saying, Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him. And God restores him to life because God is planting a witness amongst Jezebel's people. An unalterable witness. Flour and oil wouldn't cut it. But the death and coming back to life of a boy, that story's going to get around. There is a God other than Baal who needs to be worshipped and served. So deep in enemy territory, God is making himself known in small and profound ways, planting seeds that will grow to bear fruit. And we know that this abandonment that Elijah walked through has borne fruit because the widow's response in verse 24, she says, now I know that you are a man of God and the word of the Lord from your mouth is truth. So if I see God-inspired dreams get shipwrecked anywhere, it's here on this mountain of abandonment. Because abandonment strips so much of self, and it never gets easier. It takes what we have to offer and it demands more. We see this abandonment in Jesus as he sought only to fulfill the Father's will. It sucked up all of our Lord's obedience, took all of his compassion, all of his miracles, all of his love, all of his prayers, and left him one afternoon a brutal mess on a cross so that he could become the love gift to all of humanity. That's a heck of a dream. A gift of a dream to you and to me, to this city, to this nation. So our willing abandonment is essential in our dreams because Scripture and history repeatedly show that God uses it to glorify his name and bear wonderful redemptive fruit in people's lives. Abandonment takes us to the end of ourselves. And in Elijah's story, we read of this encounter in chapter 19, where fresh from the victory on Mount Carmel, where God has powerfully sent down this fire from heaven and proved to this whole crowd and to this nation that he alone is the true living God. One day later, Elijah hears the news that Jezebel is out for revenge and wants his life, and he runs. He makes a run for it out into the wilderness. And exhausted and fearful and alone, he sits under a tree and he cries out a prayer saying, God, let me die. Do you think he might be at the end of himself? This is the same man whose earlier prayer had brought back a young man's life. This is the same man on the top of Mount Carmel who'd prayed and God had delivered fire from heaven to burn up the rocks and everything around it. And here he is with a deep sense of emptiness and exhaustion saying, I've had enough. Dreams are expensive. They're powerful. But their journey can lead us through wilderness experiences of emptiness and abandonment before turning us into seasons of refreshment and joy. As powerful as dreams are in moving a redemptive work out into the world, we must also allow that same redemptive power to work its way back into us. This has been a place of tears, frustration, brokenness, and both comforting and encounter for Jill and I. It's not an uncommon conversation for both of us. We've got lots of stories, but I won't take up the 3 hours. But I have a question. As you dare to dream, will you allow God to lead you in abandonment to the world and into greater dependence on his Son as he fulfills his redemptive dream and purpose through you? In practice, living our God-given dreams is the adventure of a lifetime. True. Looking back on our 20 years of ministry in Fiji, I've got to say to you, I went in blind and ignorant, with some courage, more fear and a lot of trepidation. But God has faithfully filled in the blanks. He's filled in the blanks over many years, and these 3 themes, which I've just shared with you, have emerged as constant. First, aligning the dream he placed in me with redemptive purpose, because I can take the dream in my direction. And God faithfully has brought the dream always back to his redemptive purpose. Secondly, establishing through circumstances the reality of living faith. And thirdly, encouraging me to embrace ongoing abandonment. And I've said me, but I should say us. Encouraging us to embrace ongoing abandonment to self, to a renewed surrender in Christ. This is your month. Your month to dare to dream. It's also the season of Lent, where we experience again the reality of our redemption, where our faith is again made alive as we focus on Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Because he abandoned all of heaven to come and live among us, become despised by us, embrace with humility the brutality of beatings, whippings, and crucifixion. And so as we consider all that, how can we not surrender our dreams to him? And to be able to say, I surrender all. Lord, even this dream, I surrender and submit it to you. There was a morning, giving away some of my age now, there was a morning in 1998 in Georgetown, just not far from here, a few suburbs over. And God presented a question to me. It was a question I wasn't expecting. But it was one morning and I was in prayer and he presented this question. The question was, Peter, what do you want? The question shocked me. Because it was about a year after I'd confessed. So I'd confessed to fraud, and here I am pursuing God and having a wonderful year of intimacy as he'd grown me and led me and developed me. And suddenly there's this question, Peter, what do you want? And I didn't know how to answer. The old me would have gone straight to my back pocket and pulled out a list this long of all the things I wanted. God, I need this, I want this. But this was different because God had rewired my life and my heart, and I now knew him. And I loved him, but he now shocked me with this question, what do you want? I knew I had time to answer, but I knew I had to answer. I also knew that God was going to honour whatever it was that I asked. Do I ask to go back to business, which is what I knew? My mind went in many directions before finally, about a week later, I settled on an answer. And I don't really know, I don't remember how long it was, maybe 2 weeks, but one Friday morning, Jill and the boys went out. Jill had a Bible study on, and I think the boys were going to playgroup. So I was on my own. And so I'm alone at home, and I'm in worship and prayer, and the voice of God spoke again with the question, Peter, what do you want? I knew my answer, and so I said, Lord, I want to spend my life dedicated to serving you. And immediately a fire swept through me from the soles of my feet through to the last hair on the top of my head. God had asked, I had answered, and now God was affirming that he'd heard and responded. Now, as I said, I'd confessed my fraud, so that process was still alive. So it was another year later, I think it was 18 months later, I then went to prison, served my time, came out of prison. I spent another 4 years in silence and solitude with Jill and the boys, restoring the humanity that prison had stripped from me. And it was in 2005 that God again spoke. Now is the time. I'm opening the prison doors in Fiji. I really didn't want to go, but when God births his dream in us, there's nothing else to do but to trust and obey. Now, my brothers and sisters, it's now 2025 and I'm a much older man. But I know this to be true. We serve a God who never fails, but he's also a jealous God and a loving God who desires to use broken vessels like you and me for the glory of his name. Dare to dream. My brothers and sisters, dare to dream. For the glory of his name, dare to dream. May God be with you.